Okay, great. So I have a chat on the sidebar. So if you just want to type something in there, I'll try to keep an eye on it. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. So nice to meet everyone. My name is Ryan Kinderbotter. I am a guide with Jacksonville Mountain Guides. And you can find me on rkalpine.com where you can book a trip with me wherever you want to go. And yeah, that's me over on the side. So we're here to talk about avalanches today. Not really the fun kind like the Colorado avalanche, but more like these big scary ones. And even these small, not as scary ones, you can see this image on the right is pretty small. I do apologize, but not a big slide by any means. You can see lots of tracks. So a lot of people skied this, and then this unfortunate person got partially buried and really not a big slide. So the point of this is it really just doesn't take very much to do damage. We don't have to have these really impressive, full scale, massive avalanches like this to cause us problems, right? This is much more common. So I think I already said this. So yeah, I work with Jacksonville Mountain Guides. I'm an ER doc and a wilderness medicine physician on the side, depending on which way you look at it. And let's go back to avalanches. The big thing is they're really a play of variables that we can't control, and the only thing that we can control are the human factors, right? And that's probably the most complex thing, and it's a little bit out of the scope of what we're going to talk about today, other than trying to be conservative in our choices and give ourselves a long time frame to work with to increase our exposure to avalanche terrain as we kind of get more accustomed to making these decisions. So the terrain is fixed more or less, right? That variable doesn't really change too much. The snowpack is variable, but it's on a given day, unless it's storming or the temperatures are swinging, the overall structure remains pretty constant throughout the day, and then the changes in weather are what influence the changes in snowpack. And all of these four basically come together to give us our avalanche danger or avalanche risk. So we're going to mostly talk tonight about terrain because that's the simplest and it's the most constant, whereas understanding snowpack is very, very difficult if anyone actually can understand it. And then understanding the weather, of course, is very, very difficult as well. So, and understanding humans, I wouldn't even try to do that. So we're going to mostly focus on terrain. These are some topics that I have set up for us, and we're going to kind of really focus on, I think, these first ones from terrain down to mapping. Really want to make sure people feel comfortable reading a forecast and comfortable identifying terrain. You'll notice gear is last on here, and that's because the gear is just not that important. You definitely need avalanche rescue gear. I want to de-emphasize gear and really emphasize kind of knowledge and sober decision making. Anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So we'll just start by looking at some really basic slope shapes. So this tends to throw people off quite a bit. Convex slope kind of sticks out, right? This is a rollover, and a concavity. I don't know how to get this to stick in people's brains. Everyone always gets it backwards, but I guess concavities are sort of caved in. So yeah, watch out for rollovers. We're going to review some terrain, but we can see that these are really kind of high risk features. And we tend to teach that concavities are really safe features because the column of snow is supported from the bottom. But the reality is, if you have a rollover preceding a concavity and you're below this roller, you actually might be in a really good trigger point. And so these compressions are good, but they're not a get out of jail free card. The other really important factor in terrain, and actually I think the nidus for this conversation was someone asking about, hey, can I just go ski slopes that are less than 30 degrees and never get in an avalanche? And the truth is you probably can if you can keep it under 30 degrees. And that's the hard part. But you'll see this graph on the right. It basically details the how many avalanches occur for a given slope as a percentage of all of them. And you'll see we're not quite at zero when we get to 30 degrees, where about 3% of avalanches occur under 30 degrees, and probably in this margin between 27 and 30. Then it jumps up really drastically at 34 and continues to rise until we fall back down at 45. So it's no coincidence that this is also the best skiing. Like 30 to 45 degree skiing is fantastic, right? And that's just, we want to fall down the slope kind of the same way the snow does. And that's the sort of blessing and curse of backcountry skiing, is that prime avalanche terrain is prime ski terrain. So we can stick to under 30 and avoid this big chunk right here of avalanches. But the problem is most people can't judge 30 from 34, and you end up really increasing your risk of avalanche there. And then even if you have a measuring device, there's a lot of variability between people using inclinometers, phone apps, things like that. And I think the average on my area instructor course was a 3-degree difference between participants in terms of our measurements of slope angle. And so, really, if you want to stay under 30, you should probably shoot for staying under 27, and that would be a safe thing to do. So, keeping in mind slope angle, now let's look at some other terrain features that are important for identifying avalanche terrain. So most people probably know this, but if you don't, that's okay. So, ridges basically connect peaks or, split gullies. And so they're high points that go down a mountain, right? We tend to think of ridges as being safer for many reasons. One, they just tend to have a lower slope angle than the surrounding terrain, as you can see in this image right here. Two, there's the sort of theory that if you're on a ridge and the snowpack collapses and an avalanche occurs, that the snow will just kind of wash to either side and you'll be left, safely on top of this ridge. I think the truth is a little bit more complex than that. We tend not to want to ski directly on the ridge. We tend to dip to one side or the other to get a little bit more fall line. And that actually, if your ridge is one that's separating gullies, you might actually be in a more dangerous spot because you might be in one of these trigger points. And if you do get slid, you're now in a terrain trap or a gully, right? So ridges are great. They are safe for connecting pieces of terrain, but just ensure that you're actually on the right part of the ridge and that you're not crossing into the danger zone. Because again, similar to the slope angle problem, it's really easy to get sucked off of the ridge and just a little bit into the drainage. And accidents happen like this all the time, where people are really next to safe terrain and they just got off of it. Okay, so this is a mountain that I ski a lot. It looks really flat in this picture. This is in the Tetons. This is called 25 short, and it's called that because it's 25 short of 10,000 feet. Now, as you can see, there are a number of features here. So we have some ridges. We have, a little bit of a peak right here. We have some gullies, right? There's actually a gully right here called Pesticide Gulch that slides fairly frequently. It's a really dangerous terrain trap. And if this yellow line weren't here, I think after looking at the last couple slides, we could all probably look at this picture and say, I probably want to go up somewhere here on the ridge, or maybe on this ridge, right? And sort of some things that jump out at me as being dangerous are this bald spot right here with a bunch of little trees below it. That tells me that this slides, and I do know from skiing this a lot that this does slide fairly frequently. And then these are a number of slide paths right here, all of which empty into a much bigger major path, and you can see the smaller mature trees here. So I'm just putting this up here so we all have an idea of, kind of how we're reading this terrain. And why we ascend a certain way and the patches we're avoiding. So I'm going to switch over to I'll show you a picture of a topo map with slope angle shading of the same peak. And just to orient ourselves, the red is, 35 to 45, so prime avalanche terrain, right? You can see this purple, blue, black, and the background, so these are the actual, Teton peaks in the background. And as you can see, those are really high slope angles and really complicated terrain. But yeah, we can kind of see, 26 to 29 is yellow. And then under that, things that don't have specific shading that are just this baseline underlying map are under 25 degrees. And so when I look at something like this, I'm thinking, I want to stay in this like pistachio green or in the yellow. And this actually, let's go ahead and compare the topo to that ascent line. And you can see that this ascent line actually does a really good job of following, the green and then as much yellow as it can. So the ascent line actually crosses over here and gets this ridge, and that's actually right through here. So this is sort of human pattern and tradition is following this, what we now know to be these little pockets of lower angle slope. But one thing you'll notice is that we're crossing under areas of steeper slope, 35 to 45 degrees. And that's probably why this bald patch right here, approaching this kind of false summit on this ridge, is there. This is probably really easily triggered. It's this right over here. And so this is sort of a dangerous point on the skin track. And we actually do think about that when we're guiding this. Is this little spot right here, to me, I'm thinking a long time before I get there about instabilities. Like, am I seeing cracking? What's, in my mind, what's the danger that day? If it's high danger, if I see cracking or anything, we might not cross under that. We might go a little bit over more, or we might just turn around and go home, or we might just ski this lower section multiple times. So that's sort of how I approach applying the mapping to what I see in the field. And I'm hoping we'll have time in a little bit to actually open up CalTopo and Gaia and look at some slopes. Does anyone have questions? It feels weird to just be talking to a computer right now, even though I know there are people.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you. You made me feel human. Thanks for doing that. All right. Feel free to jump in if I'm talking too fast, or if you want to hear more about a topic, or if you're curious, or we can even cruise around CalTopo or avalanche forecast for areas where you guys live or something and look at those. Great. So I want to talk about terrain traps, and those are basically just okay, cool. No questions so far. Okay, got it. Great. So terrain traps are just like features in the terrain that amplify the risk of an avalanche. So, they are going to make the avalanche even worse, right? And those are basically gullies, because those can fill up with snow, and a small slide can turn into a really deep burial because of a gully. Bench is kind of the same thing, right? They're like a less severe version of a gully, but that flattening out of the slope can increase the height of the debris pile and bury you deeper if you get in there. Cliffs, obviously, you can get swept off of a cliff. Trees are interesting because I think we traditionally feel safer ski touring in the trees, and I think anecdotally, a lot of people really recommend, like, oh, it's a high danger day, so we're going to go ski powder in the trees, which I also do. Trees aren't magic, so I'm kind of getting off into the trees here, but they basically have looked at how close do the trees have to be to actually keep the snowpack, increase the stability of the snowpack or a slab. And basically, they have to be closer together than you can ski through. So trees aren't that great of an anchor. They might prevent some propagation of slabs or limit them, but they're really bad to get slid through because you hit trees and you get injured or die really easily. So trees are sort of they're good when they're good and they're bad when they're bad. So I think low angle tree skiing is really good, like under 30 degrees, because it does prevent some formation of certain like bed surfaces, like sun crusts and things like that tend not to form under trees so much. The snow that drops from the boughs of the trees, or we call them tree bombs if they're really big, will compress the snow adjacent to the tree. So there are some mechanisms by which trees do decrease the risk of avalanches, but it's not typically this like anchor hypothesis. It's more limiting or changing the surface of the snow over time and not allowing some of those weak layers to form. Anyone here live in Alaska or ski crevasse terrain regularly? No. Um, Everyone should definitely go ski in Alaska, especially if you're in the US, is the absolute best skiing available, I think. So definitely go there. But the problem with Alaska is there are a lot of crevasses. So if you get slid in Alaska, you might not have to worry too much about trees because there's a lot of alpine skiing there with no trees, but there certainly are a lot of crevasses depending on where you are. Rivers and streams are sort of a double whammy. They're often in gullies, right? So you get that amplified depth of burial. And then you also get like water immersion and potentially drowning or becoming really, really cold. And so that's, just sort of adds insult to injury there. How about British Columbia? Same issue with the crevasses? Yeah. Yeah, any glaciated terrain. So and the same could be true, for parts of the Pacific Northwest, where there's a lot of crevasse terrain. Certainly BC and Alaska have, bigger crevasses and a lot more terrain that covers them. I actually lost a friend in a crevasse years ago from skiing. I wasn't there, but unfortunately he passed away. And yeah, they're scary, really scary. Um, Couloirs. So these are terrain traps in a couple of ways. The Similar to a couloir is basically a gully just tilted up, right? So, couloir means hallway, I think, in French. Someone probably speaks French and probably doesn't like the way I say it, but I believe it means hallway in French. But yeah, if you haven't skied a couloir, it's pretty wild. You're in a like almost vertical gully, and so again, the same reason gullies are not great is that couloirs also amplify the effects of really small slides. And then that's not to mention that you can, hit the rocks on the banks and, have pretty severe trauma pretty easily. So those are the specific terrain traps. If anyone has questions on those, pop it up in the chat or just holler. But I think that's pretty straightforward. Like just really watch out for these things and be careful, especially with gullies. But this actually really makes my this actually really makes my like the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This picture. So this is actually a slide that I think this is from CAIC in Colorado, and I believe this slide killed a woman and her dog or dogs, which is really sad. But yeah, look, that crown's really not big. There's not that much snow. We see like grasses poking up. But this gully just amplified the depth of burial in what is maybe like, a 6 to 8 inch crown and maybe 8 inches wide. So yeah, gullies, it's really easy to get sucked into a gully on accident if you don't know the terrain well. So I think that's probably the biggest terrain trap to watch out. If you find yourself in this situation, a lot of times the thing to do, obviously not in the situation where you see a crown, but if you're in a gully on accident, a lot of times the best thing to do is just, turn around and hike back out rather than continuing to get in more trouble. That question, QRs are greater than 50%. Like you mean like 50-degree slope? Is that the question? Cool. Yeah. So the question is, bars are often greater than 50. Yeah. So totally. If you're skiing like really wildly steep couloirs, then you're generally not worried about like big slab avalanches. But those couloirs that are really steep are a really different challenge in and of themselves because they tend to be, close to ridge lines or in like high alpine terrain where there's a lot of wind, and so they'll often have wind slab. Like maybe it's only 6 to 8 inches at the most. Sometimes it's like 4 or 5, but they'll have like wind slab or a wind skin, and it's really challenging to ski through. It can just catch your skis and kind of tip you over even without an avalanche, but you can also trigger a small slide that then gives you, I mean, an even worse problem. If you're tumbling down a 50-degree couloir, you are having a bad day. So um, yes, they are sometimes on that upper end where these major avalanches don't cause problems, but you get a slough problem. There are these little wind slabs that can knock you off your feet and cause you problems. And then there can be really big, stiff wind slabs that can span a whole couloir. And those are kind of just bombs waiting to go off. You have to be really careful. Wind slabs, the same as wind loading. See, I like these questions. This is great. Um, yeah, so wind loading is the phenomenon that leads to wind slab. So, and well, I got a slide on this later, and we can talk more about it later. But yeah, so wind slab is sort of the firm chunk of snow that's sitting potentially on a weak layer that might like break, potentially even break around you, not just at your feet and slide you. And then wind loading is just any snow that's transported by wind. Yeah, and we've got some pictures to show those kind of effects. So here's another gully photo. So yeah, you can see this guy is, we assume he's probably, around 5.5 to 6 feet tall. This is a massive debris pile and really like not a big slide, not that big. And then down here as well, this looks like some sort of wet avalanche in the spring. You can see that like brown snow that's got dirt. And then this like kind of chunk, sloppy, wet, mush debris. So yeah, this is somewhere in the springtime. This is Valdez, and this is a huge avalanche they had years ago, and it basically locked the town in for I think like 2 months or something crazy. So yeah, they had to get like excavators. It was a massive ordeal. And I was driving down this highway this spring when the wet slides were starting to really go there, and we got some slides that went up to the guardrail, but none that closed the road. But as I was leaving in late April, it really warmed up, and some buddies behind me kind of almost got taken out by an avalanche going across the road. So it's not just skiing; sometimes the driving can be dangerous too. So here's an example of the train trap, right? See this the train trap being the trees right here. So it looks like a pretty mellow slope. Looks like fun, kind of easy skiing. I could definitely see wanting to ski this thing. And then you can see they probably hit like a trigger point there. There's like a little rock or something exposed. And then the crown gives way. And I don't know what happened to this person, but if you hit one of these trees, you're in for a bad time. So just a example of train trap. Okay, back to Valdez. So we can see here a couple of big train traps, right? So this major gully. Now this is interesting because in Valdez, if you're on a snowmobile, the thing to do is to go straight up this thing, up this gully on your sled, and then maybe high mark over here or try to get up under the python and go down. Um, Sometimes they'll actually go all the way up to this feature on the left called cracked ice, which is appropriately named because there are massive crevasses there, but fantastic skiing. And it's actually crazy because they'll ride up with their on their sled with their snowboard or skis. They'll ghost ride their sled down like through the skin track and like down into the gully here, and it's sort of like there's crevasses, there's people high pointing on like steep rollover slopes, and then there's random unmanned snowmobiles like screaming down through the skin track at you. It's Valdez can really be a scene. So snowmobiles aside, there's some other terrain traps besides just this gully. We've got some cliff bands right here, right? Pretty mellow terrain. You've got a cliff band leading into a gully. Down here, more cliff bands into gullies with rollovers. So as you can see, this is pretty tough terrain to navigate safely. And then that's not even getting into the good stuff like the Python couloir over here, the Berlin Wall couloirs. It's yeah, pretty terrain trip. Good skiing is often very terrain trappy. Okay, I think this might be cracked ice. Yeah, I'm not sure where this is. I think it's somewhere in Alaska. Um, but yeah, same thing. Huge gully right here. Um, and then a little gully with some rollovers, cliffs, um, no trees. Yeah, I could imagine if someone was skiing this and then got slid, boy, that would be, potentially a fatal injury really easily. So, all right, so we're kind of, we kind of started out with these like small terrain features, convexities or rollovers. We want to avoid those. Concavities, which might support slopes, but we're going to be careful because we don't necessarily trust things above us. And then, we've got ridges. We've got some ridges, kind of sub ridges here, right? Like you can almost see these prominent sort of noses coming down. And over time, I think these become more, they kind of pop out as being more appealing. And so that's probably the line I would choose if I were, um, picking the most conservative terrain is this line right here. But of course, you got to be careful not to go too far on the skier's right, because then you're exposed to this nasty gully, crevasse, whatever that is, maybe a river in there. Oh, and then we actually have to, it looks like we have a river or a stream coming out of this egress. So another terrain trap. So we're kind of zooming out from these little terrain features. And then we actually want to take a look at the macro picture, which is this ATIS scale. Have people heard of this? It's it's getting really marketed because onX, if anyone uses onX backcountry, um, they're including a layer that kind of pastes this onto terrain. And I don't know ATIS. That's okay. Yeah, ATIS is you don't need to remember what it stands for, but it's Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale, and basically it's just asking or stating like how exposed am I to these dangerous like macro features, right? And so it's pretty intuitive. Non-avalanche class 0. Okay, so no exposure to avalanches. That makes sense. Simple. Got a little bit of exposure to low frequency slides. So that might be those like 30, 31-degree slopes that are pretty supported. But maybe if the snowpack's just super touchy, they'll go on the right day. And maybe you cross something for a second. But simple is like pretty safe terrain most days. Challenging. So you got a lot of exposure to those low frequencies. So low frequency avalanche paths. So, or brief exposure to high frequency. So as you can see, this is all kind of wishy-washy, right? It's like you almost have to have this card with you in the field. This is not really this is something kind of for map planning, or I actually don't really use this, to be honest, because it becomes intuitive past the point or at a certain point. So this is basically overlaying the ATIS scale on some terrain that we might go ski. And, it's pretty, just starting at like the hard end of this. So complex terrain. This is this big bowl. Looks like there's kind of fluting or like cliffs. There's some rollovers. I think we'd all agree there's a terrain trap, right? This flattens out. And then if we look really close, there's like some gully features. There might be some little trees here. So kind of all the bad things, right? So this to me, and then this just looks wind loaded to me. I can sort of see the wind potentially coming over this ridge and just throwing snow right here. It just looks pillowy and soft. And this looks like a little stripped over here. So it might even be cross loaded too. So this is like, this looks like it just wants to slide. So that's complex. and there's no escaping it, right? That's if we go back to the scale. Minimal options to reduce exposure is complex. Extreme is no options to reduce exposure. So maybe with this complex bowl, maybe you could get like over here. You could ride this, it's slightly less exposed, or you could get on this nose here. That would be less exposed. But I would treat this whole thing with um, extreme caution. And then we've got simple, you know, dense trees over here, low slope angle. I can't say for sure what it is, but just eyeballing it, it looks under 30. And then right here, I mean, this is basically a meadow, right? So that's not going to slide, and it's far enough away from this slope that it's probably not at risk. That's a little out of the scope of today. There's something called an alpha angle that you can calculate to decide if you're um, close enough for a slope to get you. But um, yeah, I think if you're worrying about alpha angles, you should probably just not be wherever you're at. It's fairly intuitive, I think. And then this challenging terrain, this is what gets people. Complex terrain. I think most of us know to stay away from um, if the snow is not like super stable, right? Like high alpine routes in southern Colorado, people generally wait until the spring to ski those, until the snowpack has kind of healed from the winter, and it's relatively low risk. The skiing's not that good, but it's safe, so that's okay. And then the simple stuff, if it's high danger or moderate danger, or we're kind of not sure, we're just getting out there, or we want to keep it safe, we're skiing this simple terrain, which I definitely advise. Keep it simple. That's pretty easy too, right? Like there's really not much going on here. Maybe there's a little gully at the end we should watch out for. So I'd say this actually isn't as simple as this. But then challenging is, no, it's challenging because it's in the middle. This is where you have to make your decisions. And, gosh, there's this gully right here. This looks like it's cross-loaded to me. There's a lot of trees to hit. There's a lot of bald patches. I wonder if these things slide, kind of like that 25 short picture we were looking at. And then there's this giant terrain feature. Boy, if you get down in here where this all converges and this goes, I might fill up the whole drainage. So, and then likewise over here, challenging. We've got multiple start zones, it looks like. Kind of a steep bowl feature here. Obviously slides a lot. There's a lot of trees missing in a avalanche path type pattern. So these are the places where we're going to make mistakes and where we might pay for those mistakes dearly. I think complex terrain, I think that's very easily identifiable. Pretty much if it's in if it could fit in a TGR movie, it's probably complex, dangerous terrain. And if it's really boring looking, that's probably simple. And if it just looks like kind of really good skiing, it's probably challenging. And be really careful on those. This is the Onyx overlay for that ATIS scale. And so, you can see the whole valley floor is green, right? So simple. I mean, that's great, but we really don't like, I know I don't really like to go cross country ski with my big, heavy alpine touring setup. I kind of want to get on some more interesting stuff. And then it's like blue to a certain point, and then it's black above it. So I kind of think Gothic Mountain, I've ridden that on a mountain bike, but I don't think I've ever skied it. This is down by Crested Butte. But essentially, I don't know that I trust that this blue is really all that blue, because if it's got black above it, well, if that slides, this is in danger too. So I'd say just be really careful with these map layers. They can help you out, but use your eyes. If it's too good to be true, then it's probably too good to be true. Anyone here from Salt Lake?
Yeah.
You are? Okay. Have you skied?
Yep.
Have you skied cardiac or in this drainage? No. It's really good skiing, but if you look at the Avi reports, there's like a death there pretty frequently, and we can kind of see why, right? Like, I think we'd all say that this is like complex, um, like maybe extreme terrain. Some of it, like right here, right, these couloirs. I mean, they look awesome, but yeah, they kind of just look like they want to slide. There's really no way out. Massive, slide paths. There's no trees for a reason, right? There's trees on the ridge. So this, what I'd say is, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, what's safe to ski? Like what terrain is going to be resistant? This power line, looks pretty resistant. There's still some steep pockets. Like I've skied this before. This is actually a pretty steep shot. And then getting into it might not be the safest thing, right? But if we're just looking at what's in the picture, I'd say this power line, like low angle ridge that goes down, and then maybe some of these low angle trees on the backside. That looks good. Um, this ridge would be good, but it's kind of connected to this little superior feature. And so, that would be kind of high risk. All right, so another feature, this is kind of closer to Big Cottonwood Canyon, is where this photo was probably taken from. Reed and Benson Ridge, there's some cool stuff on here. And so I'd say this looks a little bit more reasonable, right? This is that what was blue called? See, I always forget. Challenging. This is more in that like challenging, not quite simple. Maybe this upper days. I think this middle part is kind of relatively low angle. So I think you might just get under 30 with this. We'd have to look at a topo or go take a reading, but this is one where, it's like low danger day or low, really specific moderate day with like specific terrain features or aspects or elevations that are affected, this could maybe go, depending on that. But, whatever this is, 10, 5, 6, 1, or this main days or two dogs, that all looks, that's more complex, right? That's less avalanche resistant. Now this looks like fun, mellow powder skiing to me. So, we don't have any like huge features. This is a little bit of a gully, but it really depends. I think the slope angle here is less than 30 most of these places. So I think you can consider this lower risk. It's never zero, and I'm sure someone slid something here, but overall, it's looking pretty low risk compared to everything else. And then really the lowest risk terrain, right, is like right in here on this left side. It's like the most boring stuff, and it's these really tight trees. So yeah, and then this part up here too, pretty dense trees, pretty low angle. Like that looks like a pretty nice slope. And then I think on this side too. So yeah, actually that's a good place to go in Salt Lake City. Is this I think Mill B is what or is that Mill D? I forget. Sounds like looks like you know it. But anyway, these powder park runs are great. Hopefully I'm not blowing up anyone's spot. Um, yeah, so just kind of going back to our 25 short example, now that we've looked at a bunch of these photos of terrain traps, I think now we maybe can see a little bit more here, right? Like maybe this topo kind of pops out as, so this is pesticide gulch right here on the right, and we can see it. And we might say, oh, okay, yeah, that's like, that does look a little spooky, even though it looks flat in the photo. Gosh, it's like bright red in the, on the topo. And yeah, there's all these start zones. Like it's, I feel, to me, it really, you look at it and you're like, okay, I see where the avalanches happen all the time, right? I'm not going to go ski that stuff. All right. So that's kind of the big terrain stuff I wanted to talk about. Let's see, you got another question. Is there a good resource for topo maps? Yeah. We're going to get there pretty soon. I would say I like CalTopo, mostly for planning. It's just really robust and they have a lot of layers, and there's a lot of public information on there too, like public tracks, and people can kind of trade CalTopos a lot of times. Like I'll send people tracks and things. So I like CalTopo. It is like really, it's got a kind of moderately techie interface, whereas Onyx Backcountry has a little bit more user-friendly interface, as does Gaia. My favorite flow is probably I start on CalTopo just because it's got, like I said, the most robust set of layers, and I've been using it a long time. And then what I'll usually do is I'll create a route there, if that's what I'm doing, and then I'll export the GPX file to Gaia, because Gaia is just like easier to use on my phone in the field. But you can, it's really just about finding one that, is like affordable for you, that works and that works well for your purposes, and that is like somewhat intuitive. They all have this like slope angle shading feature, and I think Onyx is the only one with the ATA scale, but kind of like we talked about, I think if you ski enough, if you look at enough terrain, you intuit the ATA scale. And I don't think it's really not something I worry about too much. Like I can see that this is complex terrain, red, purple, black, got it. That's scary. Um, but yeah, we'll look at mapping a little bit more soon. Create a route on the computer and then export to Gaia. Yep. Yeah. So um, exactly, we can do exactly that, and I'll actually show you pretty soon. Um, Unless you guys are on like, if you gotta go like in a minute, I'll show you right now. But yeah, I can show you how to create a route on CalTopo, and then I'll show you how to export it. Gaia, I don't think I have Gaia pulled up to where I can import it for you, but that's exactly what I do. Gaia just works faster in the field, and I like their topo for field use. It's a little bit easier for me to see. Um, these are good questions. Keep them coming if you got them. I'll just talk, and if I see stuff pop up, I'll answer it. Okay, so avalanche problems. I always hate these little triangle things. Like, I can never, like, what does this mean? Actually, I guess you can tell. So, but this one always gets me. I don't know what this is. This is obviously like wind. This is some sort of wet thing. But basically, like, okay, you can look up those triangles, but it's more useful to actually look at snow. So the reason we want to know all these avalanche problems is because it's going to get discussed in your avalanche forecast. That's why it's important to know these. There's no like test on this or anything like that. It's just going to help you understand what the forecaster is trying to tell you, because that's the hardest part of the day usually. They kind of speak in code. So dry loose is basically like fresh snow or preserved snow, like maybe on a cold north face that doesn't get any sun. And, it starts as these little, what we call point releases, and then it fans out. These don't really, in and of themselves, these aren't really dangerous, but what can happen is they can knock you off your feet if you're in consequential terrain or in like a terrain trap, right? Like next to cliffs, trees, etc. Then they can also occasionally entrain or start a slide of another weaker layer that's maybe below. Um, and yeah, this is like in Alaska, this is a real problem because they have really steep slopes and their snow just kind of turns to facets on top, which is really interesting phenomenon. But basically, they have like dry loose all the time. And so you either have to ski way in front of your slough, which is another word for these is sloughs, or you got to wait and like cross to a different fall line, wait for your slough to pass, and then get back in that fall line. So that's kind of interesting. And these do happen spontaneously. You'll see them a lot of times when the sun hits them, hits these slopes. You'll see these little point releases in dry loose. Um, Storm slab is kind of an interesting one. It's sort of like a step up from dry loose. So I think I took this picture during a storm this year, and you can see this crack. I think two cracks. Yeah, see two cracks. Oh, maybe there's cracking down here too. Yeah, so this is basically like storm snow that set up a bit. Like got heavier, like bonded. Really, it probably came in cold and then got a little warm and wet. And so this lap bit was heavier and more, or not heavier, more dense than the layer underneath it, and just sort of started to bond up. There's a little wind effect here, so I'm kind of cheating to call this totally storm slab because I know that there is some wind effect as well, and you can see those kind of little lines here indicating there's been some wind transport. But I believe this was mostly storm slab. So storm slabs, they kind of last a day or so, maybe 2 days. They're not typically that dangerous in and of themselves, except they can be pretty deep. Not like these, these dry loose slabs don't tend to be very deep, but the storm slabs can be, like whatever the depth of the storm was. And so, they can knock you off your feet. You could get buried, especially in a terrain trap. So you want to be really careful of gullies and rollers with these things. These can go on to form a persistent slab, and pretty much it's basically like if the storm slab continues to firm up and it's on a weak layer and or a sliding bed surface, as you can see here, and it persists past the storm or past a couple of days past the storm, we just call it a persistent slab. That's really all it means. So persistent slab is kind of what we always think of as being these dangerous avalanches. So when you think of like a big avalanche that like killed someone or like took out a bunch of trees or buried someone really deep, oftentimes it's these persistent slabs. And then a deep persistent slab is just like it sounds like, it's just deeper than a persistent slab problem. And some people don't use this term. I think the CAIC, Colorado, basically the Colorado Avalanche, I'm not sure what IC stands for, but the CAIC doesn't use this term anymore. But essentially, deep persistent slab is deep enough in the snowpack that you probably can't trigger it most days because we can really only impact to a certain depth. But the problem is there's spatial variability in the snowpack. And so there's thin spots like we can see right here. There's a thin spot by this rock, and that's really common. Rocks can retain some heat. They kind of melt down the snowpack and thin it out. And then that exposes these weak layers. And this looks to be naturally triggered. I don't think this is human triggered, but this slab could have been waiting for months. And then it just had a new loading event. This wind lip up here, this cornice, which has probably a massive cornice. That's probably the size of a house, just based on the scale of this photo. But like a little chunk, could have rolled off and started that thing. So really, that's the bad thing about persistent slabs, is that there's basically very little forecasting you can do for them. If you have a persistent or deep persistent slab, you pretty much just have to treat it as a bomb that's waiting to go off and just avoid. There is no way to safely ski terrain above 30 degrees with a persistent or especially deep persistent slab problem. Anyone know where this is? It's Mammoth Mountain. So this is the gondola at Mammoth. This is called this rock feature up here called Top of the World that actually gets skied a lot. We actually used to ski this couloir on the left with this cliff line when I was a kid. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, so that was our test piece when we were kids right there. And you can see they had a massive inbound slide here. And so we were talking about wind loading earlier, and I'm sorry this picture is a little low res, but you can just see Mammoth and the Sierra in general gets a lot of wind. And you can see these it almost looks like someone tried to smooth cake frosting. You can see these lines on the snow. And then you can also see this wind lipping and sculpting up on the ridge, kind of kicking up. And you can see it by the rocks, see all these sort of wind tails right here. So yeah, this is probably a combination of persistent slab, maybe deep persistent slab. This is a pretty big crown. This might be 4 feet in places, maybe 5. And then this probably had wind slab on top of it, which may have been the inciting event. And then you can actually see, it looks like I don't think that's a skier track. That's probably some snow that fell, like some wind loading snow. And that might have been the trigger. You can see this rock right here. That could be another thin point. Or it could have been over here. Maybe they threw a charge and triggered this one. I'm not sure. This one is also, I believe this is also Mammoth on a bigger snow year. And this one's scary. You can see all those rocks are buried, so much bigger snow year. But this got skied hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And then this whole slope went while there were skiers on this. No one died. I don't think anyone even got buried somehow, which is just absolutely miraculous. But yeah, so persistent slab, deep persistent slab, you really got to watch out. The reason ski resorts are able to keep runs open is because they use explosives. If you're in the backcountry, you don't have that luxury. So that's why ski resorts can manage this type of terrain in ways that we can't as recreationalists. Okay. So we got dry loose, slab. There's new slab, which is storm slab, old slab, persistent or deep persistent. We talked about wind slab, that's just wind deposited snow. And the reason we differentiate those is because if we know which way the wind blew, so most mountains have prevailing winds. So like in the Tetons, our wind will come essentially from the west or the south or southwest. And so we kind of know that with most of the storms, and you can track the wind with the weather station, we know that the snow is going to be deposited on the other side from where the wind is coming, and so we know that like northeast slopes will typically be the wind loaded ones. So that's why we specify wind slab, is because if we track the weather, which most avalanche centers will have good weather tracking, then we might know where those are and we can avoid them. Okay, just back to here. I don't know why I went back and forth so much. Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, this was up in Valdez this spring. And you can see these huge wind lips or cornices. I keep calling them wind lips, but they're massive cornices again, like bus or house size. And what actually happened, I don't know why I don't have the cornice in this shot, but there was basically this cornice line continued over to the right, sort of in between these two features. And that actually collapsed spontaneously and then triggered this slide over here. And it wasn't even, I don't believe any of the debris actually even hit this. This was just from like essentially the shockwave over there. And yeah, this is a pretty sizable slide. Not the biggest, not the deepest crown, but a lot of width. So, funny things can happen. Cornices can cause you problems even from far away is the lesson on that one. Yeah, so kind of just think about it like dry loose, storm slab, dry loose, watch your feet, try not to get swept by it. It could cause some entrainment of other avalanche problems. Storm slabs can be serious, so you definitely want to keep an eye out. You might have started the day with like good stability and low danger. Boy, you get like 12 inches of snow when maybe they only were forecasting 3 or 4. Really watch for storm slab and really dial back the terrain you're skiing. You might have gotten 2 runs on this feature, and it was like amazing snow. And then on your way up, you're feeling it. You're like, wow, the skin track's all the way filled in. The snow just feels like it's set up more, like it's like harder. It's like harder to step through. Maybe it's like cracking around your skis. That's your kind of indication that you might want to get out of there and retreat either back home or to some really safe, like really avalanche resistant terrain. So that's kind of how I see people getting tripped up with storm slab. The wet avalanches, we see these roller balls coming down. That's kind of one of our first indicators. If you notice that your ski is like going all the way through the snowpack as the day's warming in the spring, like that's a red alert type feature. Like when the snow just becomes what they call isothermic, where if you take your ski off, your boot just goes all the way down. You're like hip deep. That's really, that's when things start to get real sketchy and the whole slope ends up sliding on days like that. So you can see, this wet slide went probably before this person got there, but you can see lots of tracks. So certainly people were skiing it sometime recently. Oh, this is cool. These are 2 grizzly bears in Alaska this year. And they triggered this series of wet slides. And we actually had to follow them out because we were going out this drainage as well. And we were kind of on a time crunch because we didn't want to get wet slid. And we got these bears setting off slides and and like taking their time nosing through and like playing. And you can't get too close to the grizzly bears. And now the wet slides are chasing you. It was an interesting place. Alaska's wild. Okay. We're gonna talk about a forecast. Let's see, I'm gonna swap my screen. There. Here we go. Okay. So I just want to go through how to read a forecast with people. There's no snow yet this year, so no real snow anyway up here in Wyoming. So I'm kind of stuck with a forecast from last year, from April or from last season anyway, April 1st. So this is a pretty simple forecast, but I think it illustrates a lot of good things. Um, the bottom line is that snowpack doesn't like abrupt change, whether that's the weather occurring over a day,
Yeah, I
a
don't know if
lot
you're
of new
trying,
snow.
but we can't
What?
see anything.
Oh, you can't see it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
How about now? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So yeah, perfect. Thanks for saying that. So yeah, so this is like a springtime forecast. So we're not talking about deep persistent slabs usually at this point in the year. It's more surface instabilities and kind of changes with the weather. But let's just read it. So avalanche danger begins at moderate and rises to considerable once the sun comes out. So there you are, weather variables coming through. Snow surface is becoming wet. So the snow's heating it up, destabilizing what little instability or slab might be there. Avalanches involving the recent snowfall, think storm slab, maybe if it's midwinter, right? Um, will become likely during any prolonged period of sunshine. So they, again, we've got two new stresses on the snowpack. Recent snowfall and sunshine could be large enough to bury a person. So you almost have to read between the lines on this. And this forecaster is saying like, be really, really careful today. They rated it considerable, which is another way of them saying that. But they've said multiple times here, like, it's going to rise. Like there's two acute loads on the snowpack. You could get buried. So when you see that kind of verbiage in the forecast, like slow down, reread it, maybe write it out. Like here are the problems. Like here's what I'm going to avoid, and then apply that to your plan. The different elevation bands. That's something we want to consider when we're planning our tour. Like, okay, it's only moderate up to 7,500 feet. The reality is there's not a lot of skiing below 7,500 feet in this zone. So that's not super useful. Usually you're going up to about 9 or 10,000, right? Remember, 25 short is 25 feet short of 10,000. So we'd be up in here in this higher terrain. So we'd want to pick a real careful line and because they're talking about solar input, weather, sun, we're going to want to consider the aspect really seriously here. And so storm slab, so that's what we were talking about, right? That's what they meant when they said new snow. It's widespread. It snowed everywhere, right? So this is a rose. If people haven't seen that before, but it's a really cool thing that shows the low, mid, and upper elevation for a given forecasting area, which is different for every area. So you do need to check your elevations if you're going to a new place. And then it has, the compass on there as well. So this kind of helps you plan. Now we know they were talking about uh, sun exposure, and they even put it in bold here. Any prolonged period of sun will increase likelihood of avalanche activity significantly. So we know sun's going to be highest at noon, right? But really, it can start to really beat on the snow as early as 9 or 10. So what I would do with this information um, is these slopes right here, maybe the southeast to west, I'm going to want to be off of those, by 11 or maybe earlier if it's really hot or if I'm seeing signs that it's getting too hot, if I'm seeing roller balls, if I'm seeing natural avalanches or anything like that. But yeah, so that's kind of how I'd interpret this forecast is that this southern facing terrain is going to be the real stuff to avoid. And then things over on the more north facing side, they're not get out of jail free, but I'm going to carefully select safe terrain on that side and keep an eye. But I'm going to add margin by avoiding these sun exposed slopes during the day. Um, I think those are the big things to pay attention to for the forecast. What I really wanted to get at is, really try to read between the lines. If the forecaster is saying a lot of scary things multiple times, it means they're concerned that people are going to get injured or hurt that day or cause slides. Take a look at the specific elevation bands. Take a look at the specific aspect, and then look at your tour and try to match it up and select what's going to work. And some days none of it works. Some days you better off staying home. All right. So that's how to read a forecast. Anyone have questions on that? Cool. I think I've got some mapping stuff if people still have time. I don't have anywhere to be, so I'll keep talking as long as people want me to. Let me pull up. Let's see. I've got weather and snowpack and mapping left. I don't know if we have time for both of them just based on how slow I'm going. Do people have a preference? Like, who'd rather do mapping?
I'd say mapping.
Mapping. Okay. Yeah. I think the snowpack stuff you can read in a book and, you know, it's not that, it's not that helpful. Whereas mapping, I think is pretty helpful. All right. Let me share with you a different screen. There we go. All right. So we have a map here. So this is Valdez's Thompson Pass in Valdez, Alaska. So there's some run names here. And I think someone earlier was talking about, how do you create a route? So I'll show you slope angle first. I think that's really valuable. And then I'll show you the kind of route creation and how I do that. So let's do slope angle. So there are two ways to do this. One is you can just go over to, oh yeah, so first I'll just start. So caltopo.com. You can typically get, some level of a free account. You don't even have to log in to use it most of the time, but to save routes and to use, I think, certain overlays. It's been a while since I haven't logged in and try to use it that way, but I think you have to have an account to use overlays and to save routes. But Caltopo is pretty great. I think it's worth whatever they charge now. So just going over to this overlay, we can do all sorts of things, but probably the most useful at this point for you folks would be slope angle shading. I leave it at fixed. You can do this gradient fill as well. I don't know. It's supposed to give a little bit more nuance. I think the Gaia example I showed you earlier was gradient, and you can see this is a little more pixelated with the fixed. So Crudbusters is one of these runs that's kind of like low risk in Thompson Pass for ski touring. So on higher danger days, or if people are alone, sometimes they'll go over here. And so we can kind of see that this line, again, it's sort of like the 25 short. It's almost no accident, or it is no accident, that this line, which probably represents the typical route. I'm not sure. I don't even know who made this. I think this is a public line, or someone gave this to me, but I think this is the common ascent route. And so you can see on this topo map, this is a ridge, and that's indicated by the lines actually pointing down elevation. So if you haven't looked at a topo map before, the lines are demarcating an elevation, and there are lower and higher. And the way you know they're lower or higher is basically you just try to find a couple lines with numbers on them. And so typically the big lines are, 200 feet apart, but you can change that. Different maps have different scales. So this is going up. So we can see 3,000 here, 3,200. So this must be going down. So when a topo line bends and points downward, that's actually a ridge. And when it points upward, that's more of a draw or a gully. It's sort of backwards from what you would think. The more time you spend looking at topos, especially out in the field, like with your Gaia on your iPhone or something, the more this will make sense. So I actually think it's really good for people to have their phone out and have these mapping tools out, because it's not as difficult as it was with paper maps. And you can have a little blue dot that shows you exactly where you're at. And I think you can actually really learn to read maps very well by seeing exactly where you are on the map. And then as long as you scan the terrain around you and kind of try to figure out what each little point is, that's kind of how you learn to do this. So yeah, it's no accident that this ascent path follows a ridge and then basically sneaks through. Obviously, ascent paths aren't truly straight lines like this. So I think the real line would, basically kind of sneak through this light green up here. And then you kind of have a choice to make. It's like, do you want to go this way? It looks like there's a little bit of a gully here, right? The topo lines kind of point up. And then we know there's a real gully here. Like this is basically a canyon with water in it. So you want to be really careful of this. You don't want to fall in there. So if this is me, I'm going up here, going around that scary steep red patch. Remember, red's steep. You can see the little key down here. So red is like 35 to 45. So that's prime danger, and orange is just below that. So this is like reddish orange. So yeah, we're basically going to go around this, and then now we get here, and it's sort of a conundrum. Like, what do you do here? And again, it just depends on the day, on the context. If you're going up this ridge, you're getting woofing, cracking. There's like slides going off around you. I'm I'm really not getting close to this orange or red. That might be a day to go home, or that would be a day to go home. If I'm not seeing those hard signs of blatant instability, but I know that, hey, there's a persistent slab problem that I read about in the forecast. Well, again, I'm probably not going to go messing with even just this little patch, because that little patch is a lot bigger than me. If that snow moves, that could kill me pretty easily. So it's a useful tool, and you can try to sneak through some of these zones, but you can't let you can't you basically can't ski the map. You have to ski the terrain in front of you and work with what's in front of you. There are a lot of little undulations in the slope that are not captured by the slope angle shading or by the topographic lines. So this is an average over whatever the distance is between the lines, and that again depends on the map. Some of you may have read about an avalanche with a fatality that occurred, I think 4 years ago on Red Mountain Pass in Colorado. It was actually a recreational level 2 course, so people had a lot of experience, and they probably really knew what they were doing. And they made a tour plan based on Caltopo and the slip angle shading, and they did exactly what I was just talking about, where they're kind of like threading the needle, and this doesn't look too steep. Well, Caltopo was off a little bit in one spot, which is kind of normal. There's an error in that measurement because of the natural way that slopes vary. And unfortunately, a slide was triggered, and someone was buried and died. And so, that just goes to show, sometimes we get in this exercise of threading the needle on these slope angles. Like you could see over here, we might do that, right? We might kind of try to sneak through here. But if one of these is off, you really have to ground truth whatever you're seeing on this map in front of you with measuring slope angle, with like one of the bubble level apps or inclinometer that you can buy from Peeps or BCA or something like that. Basically measure slope angles both on the map to plan, and then in the field to ensure that you're actually in safe terrain, that you're not getting led astray. So that's slope angle shading. There's a really cool trick on Caltopo. This is partly why I use Caltopo, or this is mainly why I use Caltopo, because there's just so many neat features. So if we go to map objects over here on the left, so this is where like all the run list is. So that's cool, but there's something that's even more interesting. So if I click add, so I can make lines. So I can like make a track here. Okay, and then I can label it, Ryan's run. Okay, and then I can take that, and I can export that through the export tab. So I'd basically just click Ryan's run, export it. Great, now it's in my downloads. I can right click that and open it in Gaia, or text it to myself and then open it with my phone and open in Gaia. So that's cool. But what's even cooler is I can come down here if I want to, let's see, Of course, I can't find it. I'm like being recorded on the internet. I can't find it. Custom relief. Is it? Yeah. Digital elevation model shading. That's a real mouthful. But what's kind of cool, let's say I look at the forecast and we know that north facing slopes are really high risk today because there's a weak layer that only formed on the north facing slopes, like maybe some buried surface ore or something. And so there's like a persistent slab problem there. So I want to avoid north facing slopes. And it's only present at elevations. Alaska's really low elevation. Maybe it's present 4,000, 5,000 feet. So what I can do is I can exclude that by adding a rule to this shading model. So I can go, maybe I want to go like, we're going to give it some good breath. So we'll go northeast, maybe all the way to, where's northwest? Or we'll go, why don't we do this? We'll go north to east. So we'll just say that those are the aspects that were affected by this mysterious surface ore layer. And then well, maybe we'll say what, 3,500 to 5,000. I'm not sure if there even is. Yeah, there's some 5,000 foot peaks there. And then we want that red. So then what you have to do is click add rule. This is like computer code. I think A is for aspect 0 through 90. E is for elevation 3,500 through 5,000. And then this is just the color code for red. So now we click save. And now look at this. So now we've taken out all this terrain and we can instantly look at it and say, well, I'm not going to white ice today. Like, I don't care how awesome it looks. I'm gonna go ski Stairway West instead because I know that aspect and elevation is avoiding a major problem for today. So you can do a number of things with that DEM shading. So, and then that pops in under custom layers. That's weird. It normally says something next to it. Maybe I forgot to name it. Yeah, so that's CalTopo, how I like to use it. Those are the main features. You can also add other objects like a polygon, which would allow you to like maybe block some terrain off, or maybe there's a terrain trap or something that doesn't show up well on the map and you know a run really well. So you might add like a polygon, you know, like right here, because you just know that, oh, that's that roller that like slides every time. And so you can almost like blue dot yourself. Not that that's foolproof, but you could like blue dot yourself and make sure you're going really far around it. Yeah, so that's that. Looks like there was a message. Pretty awesome filtering feature. Is that available on any mobile app? I don't know if you can create that layer on the mobile app. I have not tried it because to me it's really like I'm usually like at my laptop when I'm doing that level of planning. And I guess just in general, the way to think about it is when I'm planning what to ski, like that decision's like way before I get out and I'm on my phone. So you know, like for instance, I was in Valdez for many weeks last year or this past spring. And you know, I was following the weather and the forecast and every observation I could see, basically from, you know, the beginning of their season until April when I got there. And so I already had kind of an idea of what like I should be skiing or should not be skiing when I got there. I had to ground truth that and like find out what was actually going on by digging around, looking for signs, talking to people, all that. But just to say that kind of doing this type of work usually is done like on a laptop or a desktop, and you really should be making your decisions on what you're going to not see, like with a coffee in your hand, rather than making it like at the top of the suite power run. Because I don't know about you, I can't control myself that well. So if I haven't closed off the suite 35-degree power run when I'm at home with the coffee in my hand, I'm sure not gonna be able to close it off when I'm at at the top of the run about to drop in, right? So I'm not sure if that's available on mobile. I definitely encourage you to try to do those things ahead of time. Cool. I've got, let's see, I think I have a couple more slides if people are still psyched. And then everyone can go eat dinner or whatever. Okay, keynote. All right, I think you guys should be able to see that. All right, so weather and snowpack. There we go. Oh, avalanche.org. I did want to say that. You can go to avalanche.org and you can find your local forecast zone usually, and they've got a bunch of really good tutorials on there. A lot about terrain management, a lot about planning and things like that. They've got Gaia has a really good workshop on how to plan using Gaia. So yeah, there's lots of resources. I think this is just like dipping your toe in tonight. So weather and snowpack. Okay, so the snowpack stability is really determined, or its ability to stabilize is mostly determined by the temperature gradient within the snowpack. And essentially, the ground is typically freezing or 0 in Celsius, or 32 in American, and then the surface is whatever the surface is, right? So that's based on the ambient temperature, cloud cover, radiation, solar radiation, et cetera. And essentially, if the snowpack's really thin and the temperature is like 35 degrees Celsius, or that's pretty hot, maybe like 22 Celsius, still pretty warm. But let's say it's 18 Celsius or 20 Celsius on the surface. Well, if you have a 10 centimeter snowpack, that's a really big temperature gradient, 0 to 20, over a very small amount of time. Now, if you have the same ambient temperature, the same solar condition, cloud cover, et cetera, and your snowpack is in this example 100 centimeters, well, you've distributed that temperature gradient over a much bigger column of snow, and it basically smooths out, to use kind of a layman term, it basically smooths out the each layer's ability to deal with that temperature, and it promotes strengthening of the snowpack, what we call rounding. And you don't even have to remember any of that. Just remember that deep snowpacks are strong, which is why we think of Colorado as being a typically like weak snowpack, because there's just not that much snow there. Sorry, the folks in Colorado. And that's why you can go ski crazy stuff in Alaska, like we were looking at, is because there's so much snow there, and it's a specific kind of wet snow. It's not that cold. It just really, everything about it promotes strengthening of the deep layers of the snowpack in general. These are generalities, not necessarily true in every case. Anyone here ever heard of surface ore? That shiny stuff that will be on like your car windshield, or if it hasn't snowed in a long time, but it's been really cold out, especially if you're down in like a gully, which, remember, we're not going there, but maybe you've been down in a gully or down in on a frozen lake bed in the winter, you'll see this like crazy crystals, and they look like feathers. So those guys are terrible when they get buried by a slab, by like maybe a storm slab that turns into a persistent slab, because they're so planar, they can just slide across each other really easily. And they're so planar that they're really resistant to bonding to each other as well. They just want to slip slide. And basically the way these are made is by cool, clear nights in periods where there's not been a lot of snowfall or wind to disrupt them. And so essentially you have these like sort of conditions, basically how much snow is there, how cold is it, how frequent does it snow. Those are the main things that determine the overall stability of the snowpack and how it can heal. This picture down here shows some, I think, buried surface ore, or maybe this is something called depth ore that developed just due to really bad conditions, like really thin snowpack, super cold. That's really obviously very dangerous, I think. everyone can see that. The facets are another bad layer, and a similar environmental condition leads to that. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. I actually wasn't going to put this in, and now I know why, because we could keep talking about this all night and it wouldn't help us really avoid avalanches at all. So if you want to know that stuff, that's great. There's a lot of great books on it. Staying Alive in Avalanche Terrain talks about it, but you know, it's not necessary to know that. Oh yeah, thanks. Someone just said they have to go, but yeah, thanks for coming in. So yeah, I got a couple more, and if you got to leave, feel free to leave. Types of snowpack based on the climate, we typically call these areas that are closer to the coast get more snow. They're a bit warmer. The snow is a bit wet. Snow is a bit more wet, maritime. And then, you know, Colorado, we call and New Mexico call a, you know, continental snowpack. It's that basically the example I just showed you, thin, doesn't snow that much, really cold, so it promotes a lot of surface ore. And then, you know, where I live in Wyoming, and where some of you live in Utah, and where a lot of the good skiing is this Intermountain area. And that's sort of just like, sometimes it's totally continental, sometimes it's a lot more maritime. And then sometimes it's just sort of a mix. So these aren't hard and fast rules. You can have a continental type snowpack in California. You can have a maritime type snowpack in Colorado if the conditions give it to you. Okay. And I put this here, gear question mark, in case we finished early and people had questions about gear. I don't really have anything too much to say about gear. Does anyone have any gear questions? Cool. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, so that's all I got. Thanks for everyone who hung in here this long. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, yeah, you can catch me on Reddit. You can email me, info@rkalpine.com. And I just put this slide in here. This is my friend Brad. He's a really good skier, also an ER doc in Wyoming. But this is really mellow terrain, very flat, like definitely not TGR movie type terrain. You wouldn't get excited about looking at it. But man, this was a really fun day. It was a kind of a dangerous day. We couldn't go ski anything else, but we had the best time. And so I just want to end with that, you know, we see all these movies and pictures of really rad stuff where we're used to skiing at resorts. The backcountry is really, really dangerous. That appealing terrain is really, really dangerous. And yeah, I'd encourage everyone to be really conservative and take your time as you get out there and find mentors, you know, read books, and just take it slowly, listen to your gut, and err on the conservative side. And yeah, okay. Got a lot of thank yous. I appreciate that. That's really nice. Also, is the bird still open in Jackson Hole? Yes, the bird is still open. Yeah. You should definitely keep going to the bird in Jackson Hole. All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you learned something and had a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.